Academic Standard Philosophy course. Hi everyone! I hear the Middle Ages is also called the Dark Ages, without any culture.
That is the story of only Europe, where the Germanic barbarians took over.
Alexander the Great and the Roman Empire had already transmitted the Greek and Roman culture, including Christianity, to the east and the Mediterranean.
Exactly. The next protagonists were the Arabs of North Africa and Mesopotamia, the Aryans of Iran and India, and the Turkics of Central Asia. They developed an ancient heritage, as Islamic culture. It was rather the Golden Age. Foreign folks did not suddenly invade. Plagued by internal conflicts and external threats, the Romans willingly hired them as mercenaries. Nevertheless, the Romans mistreated them. So in 378, the Germanics rebelled and killed the Eastern Emperor. The Germanics furthermore invaded Rome in 410, and subsequently established their own Visigothic kingdom in Iberia.
The Romans brought their own misfortune upon themselves.
The Romans believed that Christianity and their disrespect for their own gods contributed to such a situation. So, a North African bishop, Augustine, had to argue apologetics or theodicy to defend Christianity. He said, this was not God's failure, but just the result of our own sin of abusing freedom. For now, the goods and the bads are together, but on the last judgment, we will be divided into the city of God and the earthly city, so we should prepare for that, as Christians.
He used even the crisis to evangelism.
Pelagius urged good deeds, as preparation for the last judgment, and became popular in Jerusalem. However, criticizing him, Augustine insisted that God's grace of choosing is absolute, and that no human deeds influence God. Meanwhile, Cyril of Alexandria maintained monophysitism, that Jesus was the incarnation of the Logos of God. But Nestorius of Antioch countered with diphysitism, arguing that Jesus had both divine and human natures, since God could not suffer. In 431, supporters of Augustine and Cyril violently seized the Council of Ephesus, and forcibly declared Pelagius and Nestorius heretics.
It was just an ugly power struggle in the Levant churches.
In addition to the Germanics, the Hun King Attila of Central Asia also invaded Gaul to collect money for steel weapons that the Romans would not pay for. The Western Romans fled into the Eastern Roman Empire. In 451, the Eastern Emperor unified Christianity with Patriarch Anatolius of Constantinople and Pope Leo I of Rome, declaring both monophysitism and diphysitism heretics. Although Pope Leo I negotiated directly with Attila and persuaded the Huns to withdraw, the Western Roman Empire disappeared in 480.
Both Roman churches cooperatively took over the Levant churches.
Some Romans stayed behind in the West. Boethius served as consul under the Ostrogothic king Theodoric, but was executed on suspicion of conspiracy. He wrote in prison, on the consolation of philosophy, discussing the conflict between faith and freedom. Sensing the danger, Benedict the monk left Rome immediately.
Working among the barbarians was life-threatening.
Monk Benedict established a new style monastery in Monte Cassino, 100 kilometers southeast of Rome. It was a Christian community, with the motto of pray and work, that practiced an ascetic life of poverty, chastity, and obedience. However, in reality, it was a manor fortress of the Roman aristocracy, where snobby monks indulged in the arts and culture, employing large numbers of servants, warriors, and peasants, making and selling goods, such as bread, wine, honey, medicines, meat, fruit, leather products, and iron products.
It was a commercial enterprise in the name of Christianity.
Gregory I became Pope in 590, and founded manor fortress monasteries of Benedict style in various places. The Germanic kings needed the religious authority of the Church to establish their rule in the Germanics. Meanwhile, local Germanic lords also actively built their own monasteries of the same style, to prevent the king from plundering their lands. Thus, most of Western Europe nominally belonged to some of the local churches or monasteries in Mosaic, and, under the Augustinian doctrine that human freedom is the root of all evil, the Germanics as their employees forced a life of poverty, chastity, and obedience, more than priests and monks. This was called hierarchy or holy government.
The staying Romans ruled the Germanics by forcing them to live like monks.
As inland Silk Road trade stagnated, due to competing interests between the Roman Empire and Sassanid Persia, the maritime Silk Road, linking Sui China, Charlukya India, and the Persian Gulf, boomed. Meanwhile, Arab caravans with camels traversed the desert, between Iraq and the Mediterranean, also flourishing. They were more omnivorous than polytheistic, adopting a wide range of foreign gods. Especially, Mecca was too bad, stole sacred objects from various cities, and enshrined them in their Kaaba temple. People had to pilgrimage there, to pray to their own local gods.
I guess exclusive monotheism is rather rare.
The Sassanid Empire also began to seek out interests in Arabia. However, the Arabs had already lost tribal unity. As well as between caravans, even within the same town, they fought as business rivals, and the gap between rich and poor also widened. With a sense of crisis, the merchant Muhammad of Mecca prayed quietly alone in a cave, when he heard God in 610. It told of the Last Judgment. It renders status and wealth meaningless, and judges them all equally, before God. Therefore, in preparation for this, people should form communities of mutual support, and prostrate themselves before God.
So people followed him?
No way. The Arabs were too proud to prostrate themselves even before God. Those who followed him were, at most, only the poor. However, the people of Medina, 400 kilometers north of Mecca, fell into conflict, and invited them, as mediators without any relation of interest. Muhammad and his 70 followers moved there, as hijra in 622, and they robbed Meccan caravans, to support themselves.
The people of Mecca would get furious.
Yeah. In 627, 10,000 Meccans attacked Medina. However, Muhammad used a trench to stop the camel charge, and won a crushing victory. Muhammad in turn conquered Mecca and cleansed the Kaaba temple full of stolen idols, in 630. The surrounding cities sang a different tune at once, followed Muhammad, and attacked rival cities with him. At the same time, the Persian emperor died, and they used it as an opportunity to get the western half of the Arabian Peninsula.
Thus, he became the new tribal leader.
But he died so soon in 632, without his child. His friends became his deputies, caliph, and the Umayyad family took the lead in uniting the community, the Ummah, with the Quran, the book to recite. Although Muhammad's cousin Ali became the fourth caliph in 656, the Umayyad family also claimed the title of caliph, and established their dynasty, the Umayyad. The followers of Ali separated as the Shiites, namely party, and insisted that only Muhammad's relatives could correctly interpret the prophecies as imams or guides. Against the Arab Umayyad, the Aryan Persians and the Turkic Central Asians supported the Shiites.
Muhammad said, all are equal before God, didn't he?
The caliph of the Umayyad was hereditary, but they had no primogeniture, so conflicts within the families began soon. At the end of the 7th century, Sunni Islam was established, which holds that God's intention is revealed through the consensus of the Ummah, ijma. To establish ijma regarding who should succeed the caliphate, and what rules we should follow, they reviewed and considered Muhammad's words and deeds, as well as the history of the early Ummah.
The way, based on the followers' consensus without priests, was unique to Islam. The God of Islam is Allah, right?
Allah is not the name of their God, the word just means the God, Ilah, with the definite article al in Arabic. He has 99 names, but he is absolutely unique and present anytime anywhere, so his figure cannot be pictured. Muslims, the followers of Islam, believe in 6 imams or guides, not only God, but also angels, holy books, prophets, the Last Judgment, and God's grace.
God is everywhere, so that the Muslims can worship him everywhere.
Second, angels, Gabriel of the message, Michael of the wisdom, Israfil of the signage, and Azrael of death. Besides them, there are so many good and bad spirituals, so we need the protection of the good angels.
Actually, Islam is rather similar to polytheism.
Third, the Muslims also have many holy books. The first is the Quran, which should be recited in its beautiful sounding Arabic, as the very word of God. They also revered the 5 books of Moses, David's Psalms, and even Jesus' 4 Gospels. These holy books made Islam portable, and allowed individuals to hear the word of God directly, without clergy or a church.
Quran is their mobile church.
Fourth, they also believe in many prophets, especially Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad. They say Muhammad was sent, because the first 5 failed to convey God's will. However, they regard even Muhammad as a human, and before the great God, no prophets should be worshipped with pictures and statues.
Saying Jesus was also a human would anger the Christians.
5th, they believe in the Last Judgment. All the dead wait for it in the underworld, Barzakh. On the day, we will be resurrected, and divided by whether we can cross the bridge, as Sirat, to the heaven Jannah, or fall to the hell Jahannam.
Their last judgment is simpler than Christianity.
6th, God's grace, Qadar. God is so generous that, He has already forgiven us human beings, who ate the fruit of the knowledge. Far from it, He blesses us. He is omniscient and knows who does good, so He waits for us, preparing Jannah.
He is in contrast with the irritable God of Judaism.
However, to meet God's expectations, we must surrender ourselves to God, keep the 5 ibadat, and strive to do good. That is Islam, surrendering to God. As the first of ibadat, we should daily recite the declaration, Shahada, which is, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadun Rasulullah, namely, there is no God but the God, Muhammad is the messenger of the God.
They recite the spell every time.
The second is prayer, Salat, which is performed 5 times a day, pre-dawn, pre-morning, afternoon, dusk, and night. However, before every prayer, the Adhan's call to worship is heard throughout the city, and people must wash their hands and feet, as well as their noses and ears, as wudu dictates. When the time comes, they prostrate themselves in the direction of Mecca, in the prescribed order and number of times. Individuals can also do this, but it is recommended to visit the mosque, at least on Fridays.
What early risers they are. Since it's hot there, I guess they will finish their work in the morning.
3rd, they must give 2.5% of their wealth to the poor every year, as zakat. 4th, they must fast, as Sawm, from sunrise till sunset of Ramadan, the 9th month. 5th, they should pilgrimage to Mecca, as the Hajj, at least once in their lifetime, in the 12th month. However, they use the Islamic lunar calendar, so the seasons of the months change each year.
With daily prayers, fasting, pilgrimages, and charity, being a Muslim must have a lot of hard work.
It may not be easy, but Islam has many exemptions. For example, children are not required to fast, and pilgrimages are limited to those with sufficient financial and physical abilities. If traveling by plane, they may pray the total number of times, after they arrive at the airport. Their rules are practical, because they are based on the consensus of Umar.
Maybe that is better than the Pope, arbitrarily imposing something outrageous on people.
Besides ibadat, the Muslims have various rules. Art, music, alcohol, gambling, and pork are not allowed. No one is sure why, but it probably means that we should enjoy what God has given us, rather than what humans have created. However, as mentioned, God is generous, He doesn't pay much attention to details.
What about pagans?
Interestingly, Islam does not force belief on anyone. It simply calls them to pray, if they want to be successful. They believe that the pagans would have their own prophets, so some of them may also be called to heaven, by following them.
Anyone could be successful if one gets up that early, keeps clean, meets with friends on every prayer, and works hard like them. By the way, what happened in Europe after that?
With defeated slaves no longer available, the Roman huge planters abandoned their fields, and the lands returned to their original dark forests, infested with wolves, bears, and bandits. A few towns and monasteries enclosed by rough stone walls were barely scattered, like lone islands in the ocean.
It was literally the Dark Age.
However, the climate became warmer, and agriculture developed. Until then, the Germanics had only barley, but the Romans left behind wheat and water wheels. Monasteries owned by local lords actively encouraged peasants to cultivate the surrounding forests. Thus, the Germanics began to eat bread, and their former barley was used to produce beer and feed livestock. As a result, their diet improved significantly, and the population increased.
No matter how plentiful food became, their lives were still like those of livestock.
On the other hand, climate change tormented the Muslims with desertification. For food, they had to expand their trade area, through the conquest of different ethnicities, from as far east as Central Asia, to as far west as Iberia. However, when they crossed the Pyrenees and entered Gaul, Charles Hammer Martel and the Germanic Franks defeated them at the Battle of Tours in 732. Rebellions by converted tribes broke out in various places within the Umayyads, and the Umayyads became weaker.
See, the hairy barbarians were stronger.
The Abbasids took over the caliphate in 750, with the support of the Aryan Persian Shiites. In addition, the Abbasids, in alliance with the Turkic nomads, defeated the Tongs of China at the Battle of Talas in 751, thereby gaining control of the Silk Road. They acquired from China not only paper and gunpowder, but also compasses, which enabled the Muslims to expand into the maritime Silk Road. However, the Umayyad revived in Iberia and became independent. At the same time in Europe, the Pope ordered Boniface to encourage the conversion of the Germanics, and made Charles Martel's son, Pippin III, the new king of the Franks.
Linking with China, the Abbasids must have flourished.
However, the Abbasids existed on a delicate balance between Arab Sunnis and Persian Shiites. So, they kept the Shiite Imam under house arrest in Baghdad. However, the sixth Imam died in 765. His expected successor, Ismail, had already passed away, so the majority of Shiites had Ismail's younger brother, Musar, be the seventh. But those who did not accept Musar formed a sect, the Ismaili, went into hiding, and armed themselves in preparation for the coming of a new prophet.
The Arabs and the Persians have been at odds since ancient times.
With the enormous wealth brought by the land and sea Silk Roads, the fifth Caliph al-Rashid of Abbasids sought cultural integration. He unified the empire in Arabic, and had immigrants from the Eastern Roman Empire translate Hellenistic texts. Persian scholars Al-Fazari and his son also translated Indian mathematical and astronomical texts of al-Rashid's library in the capital Baghdad. Al-Rashid's palace was decorated with worldly figures, botanical paintings, and lavish artworks. It was home to poets, musicians, and the most beautiful women, so anything went, even boyhood and wine.
Al-Asid also appears in the Arabian Nights as an elegant playboy. But Islam prohibited arts and music, didn't it?
At the same time, Charlemagne, the son of Pepin III, was made Western Roman Emperor by the Pope in 800. Al-Rashid ostentatiously showered Charlemagne with silks, perfumes, water clocks, and other gifts. As well, although Charlemagne could not read or write, he also unified the official language into Latin, established a school at the Aachen court, invited teachers from monasteries, such as Alcuin, and attempted to revive the 7 liberal arts of the Romans: logic, grammar, rhetoric, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. Therefore, it is known as the Carolingian Renaissance. However, the Abbasid Empire was too vast to reach a consensus as a unified Muslim. Local military governors established their fiefdoms, and conflict between the Arabs and the Persians became worse. When al-Rashid died in 809, al-Ma'mun, al-Rashid's son, but having a Persian mother, could not be the successor. So he killed his younger brother, the sixth Caliph, and took over the caliphate by force in 813.
The conflict between the Arabs and the Persians was deep-rooted.
Al-Ma'mun worked to unite cultures too. He publicly opened his father's library as the House of Wisdom, Bait al-Hikmah, and invited the renowned mathematician and astronomer al-Khwarizmi to be its director. Al-Ma'mun also had the philosopher al-Kindi to bring together the entire world of learning in an Aristotelian style. In addition, al-Ma'mun commissioned even the Assyrian Nestorian Ibn Ishaq, as known as Johannidius, to translate Greek texts, and had him introduce the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, the mathematics of Ptolemy, and the medicine of Hippocrates and Galen, to the Islamic world.
In Baghdad, the Muslims rebuilt the library that the Romans abandoned in Alexandria and made it more than that.
The unity of Europe was also critical. The Germanic Normans of Denmark and Scandinavia raided the prosperous Great Britain and the continent as Vikings. They came up the rivers and plundered even inland towns, using their unique arcs. The Muslims of North Africa invaded Scilly. In addition, the grandsons of Charlemagne divided their Frankish kingdom into thirds for themselves in 843.
The Germanics were barbarians as ever.
Nevertheless, the court school in Paris rather flourished with the refugee scholars. Eriugena adopted the Neoplatonism of Pseudo-Dionysius and established his own philosophy. According to him, the uncreated and creative God established the created and creative ideas as his self-consciousness. They made the uncreated and uncreative creatures, pure spiritual angels, spiritual and material humans, and pure material things. These try to return to God through their respective ideas.
Namely, that means killing individuality and living only as generic peasants and warriors. That was the very philosophy of the Dark Ages.
The Abbasids had placed successive imams of the Shiites under house arrest in Baghdad. But when a secular dynasty, the Saffarids, took over Persia, the Abbasids assassinated the 11th Imam in 874. However, many Shiites believed that he had a 5-year-old child who went missing away by God. So, they followed the intellectuals, the ulama, as the 12 Shiites, until the successor of the Imams returns for the Last Judgment. The faith spread in Persia and Central Asia, and they developed a strong resentment towards Arab domination.
The 12 Shiites were better than the Ismaili Shiites. However, both would make trouble someday.
Within Sunni Islam, influenced by Persian Zoroastrianism, Hellenistic Gnosticism, and Indian Brahmanism, Bastami established Sufism, an attempt to attain the same mystical experience as Muhammad, with unique breathing exercises. Those who claimed to have direct knowledge of God were dangerous to the community based on the consensus. The knowledgeable and respected Persian jurist, Al-Tabari, emphasized the importance of basing our knowledge on rigorous historical facts. Persian Al-Razi, another well-read physician, also argued that we should know God, not through ecstasy, but through our reason. Sunni Muslims followed them.
It is interesting that all were Persians.
Europe was fragmenting. Although the Normans and Muslims invaded, the kings were ineffective, so in the 10th century, the local lords switched their allegiance to the Pope, and donated their territories. Thus, by gaining control of more than 1,200 strategic locations, through his own abbeys such as Cluny, the Pope became a vast secular lord, with 20,000 monks, their servants, warriors, and peasants. Cardinals and lords struggled for the concession of the papacy. In addition, the beautiful Merzia became the mistress of successive popes, made her sons pope, and took over the church, so the age was called pornocracy.
That was certainly the end of the world.
In 909, the armed Ismaili Shiites established a new caliphate in North Africa, becoming independent as the Fatimids. The Umayyads in Iberia also claimed the title of caliph in 929. Moreover, the 12 Shiites established the Buyids in Iran in 932. Despite this division of the Abbasid Empire, Turkic al-Farabi was active in Baghdad, distancing himself from politics and religion. As the second master after Aristotle, he re-established a comprehensive philosophy.
The idea of a unified Islam now seems impossible more.